want to introduce Nicole, one of the greatest curators of all time, and one of my favorite people in the world. She's going to give a presentation about, she's going to talk you through the subject of synonyms and ontologies. It's a very convoluted subject with lots of different problems, so hopefully we'll give you a good impression of how it works. And you can see also Macy behind Nicole, her cat, which is also one of our, most important participants in these seminars. She's not learning anything; she already knows everything, but at least maybe she will make some comments throughout the course. So with that, I'll hand over to you, Nicole, and thank you for running this tutorial.
Yes, thanks. That's a great introduction. Thanks, Nico. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to listen for our session today on synonyms and OBO ontologies. So thinking about synonyms really might seem like it's kind of straightforward. The synonyms are alternative labels, alternative terms for terms in our ontology, but really Nico put together this tutorial, and I contributed to it, as did Chris Mungle, and there's really a lot of nuances with synonyms, uses of synonyms and ontologies. So I think this is a really great comprehensive tutorial to keep in mind a lot of these different considerations that we need to consider when adding synonyms to our ontologies. So a lot of the examples in this tutorial are heavily focused in the biomedical disease domain, because Nico and I primarily work on one of our major ontologies that we work on is the Mondo disease ontology, which some of you may be familiar with. So a lot of the examples are disease focused or human kind of disease phenotype focused, just because that's our primary area of focus. Of course, there's infinite examples in other domains as well. And being that OBO Academy is kind of open to everybody, it's for everybody, we invite you to come in and you're welcome to contribute to this specific lesson and add additional examples. Anyone can come in and click the edit button, which will take you to the GitHub repository, and you can do pull requests and make suggested changes to this. So if you feel like this lesson is too heavily focused on examples that are outside the domain that you work in, then please go in and add additional examples that resonate more with your particular fields. And we are always very grateful for any contributions to the materials that we create. So today we're going to discuss 4 main topics, including the definition and basic concepts around synonyms. So I think we all probably know what a synonym is, but there's other considerations on how we use synonyms in our ontologies, the importance of accurate creation of synonyms. As Mondo and all the OBO ontologies we develop are community-based ontologies. So at least speaking from my use cases with Mondo, we get a lot of requests for synonyms. Sometimes they're not always completely accurate. So it's important that we keep this in mind and how important it is to have accurate synonyms. And as you may know, and as we're going to talk about in this presentation, we have different synonym scopes. So whether a synonym is exact or related or broad or narrow, which I think really helps with ensuring that we have accurate synonyms added to our ontologies. The OBO model for synonym representation. So like I said, the synonym concept or the synonym scopes, and we'll also talk about the synonym properties and a brief outlook on validation and some of the tests that we can run quality control tests that we can run to ensure that we are adding synonyms to the ontologies in a consistent and complete way. So getting started, just a bit of an overview of synonyms. So different scientific communities have developed widely divergent terminologies for describing the same things. Given that we're the OBO foundry, the biological and biomedical foundry, we're concentrating on scientific communities, but clearly there's different terminology for concepts across all different kinds of areas of knowledge and domains, but just concentrating for our purposes on the scientific community. And like I said, a lot of our examples are biomedical and disease focused. So an example of synonymous terms would be varicella and chickenpox, which both refer to the highly contagious viral disease that causes the causes fever and the pock marks on your skin. So that's an example of two synonymous terms. Macroglossia, which is depicted here in this picture, can be referred to as enlarged tongue, increased tongue size, or given the scientific names like megaloglosia, megaglossia, macroglossia. So there's a lot of terms that can be used for the same. There's a lot of different terms that can be used that mean the same thing, and they can be used kind of interchangeably. So this is really important when we're building ontologies and using them for things like scientific databases, or when we're describing things in scientific publications, or when we're building ontologies. We need to recognize that whether the term, a concept, if it actually refers to the same real world concept, if they have the same meaning, or if they're really just kind of used interchangeably but not exactly synonymous. Being able to accurately describe terms as either exact synonyms or not is very important with our representation of knowledge in our ontologies. So yeah, so like the role of our ontologies is to provide an explicit conceptualization of a domain. But a lot of our biomedical ontologies have become more than that, than just that. We also, in addition to representing concepts in a specific domain, kind of the reality of the domain, we also provide these hierarchical structures that allow for subsumption reasoning. We also provide formal definitions of the terms, either in text format and in computational format. And the synonyms are another critical piece of the ontology that allows for a disambiguation of the terms, or allows for being able to search for terms, and it really helps with information retrieval when we have accurate synonyms where someone can search on a synonymous term and find the concept that they're looking for in the ontology. So as I've already alluded to, and you're probably familiar with, synonyms can have different levels of precision. We can have either exact synonyms that have the exact same meaning as the concept in question, broad synonyms, which are more general, or related synonyms, where a term that is used as a synonym, but it's not truly the exact same meaning. And the synonyms can also be used for different purposes, and we'll go into more detail about the different synonym properties, how we can tag synonyms in the ontologies. This has been done in several of the ontologies that I work on. Like, for example, with the human phenotype ontology, I led a project where we added layperson synonyms. We systematically went through all the terms in the HPO, me and several other folks on our team, and we added layperson synonyms to the phenotype terms to make the ontology more accessible to non-medical experts and to patients and caregivers and such. You've also probably seen a lot of usage of acronyms in the ontologies, where if a term is either abbreviated or is given an acronym, they're specifically tagged in such a way. And also for language translations. So the HPO is another example that has done a huge amount of work to provide translations of the HPO into various languages. And the sickle cell disease ontology too has also done a translation, so they can add synonyms. The HPO and SCDO have added synonyms in different languages and tagged them as the language, French or Spanish or whatever language they've been translated into. But having all these variety of synonym types without being able to explicitly kind of differentiate them in these ways can make it difficult for them to be curated and used. Hence, we have these kind of formal properties that we've been applying to the synonyms. So that's kind of an overview, and we're going to go into more of a deeper dive into some of these areas. And this lesson is aimed for ontology curators, who I know we have a lot of on this call, data analysts, tool developers, and I think anyone working in semantic engineering who's building ontologies. And this hopefully is relevant to you to understand how to accurately curate and use these synonyms that are provided by the OBO ontologies. And I really welcome anyone to jump in and share any examples or add any comments as we go through this lesson. This is not meant to be just me lecturing to you. I'd love for you to come in with examples and share anecdotes if you feel so inclined. So just feel free to unmute your microphone and jump in if you would like. So The two prerequisites for this course are just a basic understanding of ontologies and a basic understanding of structured data, and there's no advanced preparation required. So what we're delivering as part of this course this morning for me, is one, a basic understanding of core concepts around synonyms, also a clear understanding of synonym properties and synonym types, which you already started talking about a little bit, and some rules to curate and use synonym properties and synonym types correctly. So first, we'll go through an introduction and examples and talk about the OBO model for synonyms. And then lastly, we'll give a basic overview of validation. So before I dive into the introduction and examples, I'll just pause for a minute or a second if anyone has any questions before we go. Okay, so first, starting with what is a synonym? So we have these little information boxes here in the lesson. So these are, if you wanted to quickly skim through this and get some of the definitions and information, you could scan for these little blue boxes. So according to Merriam-Webster, a synonym is one of two or more words or expressions of the same language that have the same or nearly the same meaning in some or all senses. So basically, a synonym is kind of an alternative term for the term that has the same meaning as the term in question. So they provide a linguistic variety and help clarify meaning by offering alternative expressions with similar or identical meanings. So our examples, like I said, are focused a lot in the medical and clinical domain. And considering that field, it's very critical that we have proper synonyms to ensure that different terminologies used by various healthcare professionals or patients or researchers refer to the same conditions or treatment. This is really critically important for effective communication, accurate diagnoses, and for patient care. So here are a few examples of some medical terms and synonyms that correspond to these terms, such as acute myocardial infarction. This is also referred to as heart attack or MI. So here's an example of an acronym. So this term is the clinical term for what's commonly known as the layperson term heart attack. And using both terms can help ensure clarity in patient communications and in medical documentation. And I noted here, and then I noticed that Nico already provided this example below, but this is something I honestly just really recently learned within the last few years at a seminar I was attending, that heart attack is different from cardiac arrest, which is also known as sudden cardiac arrest, which is when the heart stops beating suddenly, but it's not the same as a heart attack. So I think this is a good example of kind of terms that are often commonly used synonymously, but heart attack and cardiac arrest are not actually the same thing. And that's pretty critically important, especially if in the context of patient care and diagnoses. Hypertension is another term that's probably commonly known, also known as high blood pressure. These terms are used interchangeably. Hypertension is more commonly used in the clinical setting, but high blood pressure is more commonly used in a layperson community or in patient education or public health communications. Cerebrovascular accident is also known as a stroke. Stroke being probably the more commonly known term. I've personally never heard of anyone having a cerebrovascular accident, but I've heard of a lot of incidents of stroke in my experiences. Also known as brain attack. So sometimes this brain attack term will be used in educational materials to emphasize its urgency, and it's kind of similar to a heart attack. It's a very serious medical condition. And like we had above, varicella is a synonym for chickenpox, this common childhood illness, which now is often vaccinated against and not as common. But if you're in my generation, you probably had chickenpox when you were a child, a very contagious disease that and then forms immunity after you've had it. Both of these terms in the literature make it accessible both for medical professionals and general public. So using these synonymous terms makes them helps with facilitating communication across different levels of medical expertise and within the patient community, and aids in effectively delivering healthcare. So those are some examples of some biomedical synonyms. And then this brings up the question if all synonyms are exact. So if someone refers to two terms, if they're commonly used as synonymous terms, does that mean that they're exact? And the answer is no. And we'll describe why here. So many synonyms could be considered exact because of subtle variation, or they're not considered exact because of subtle variations in the meaning and the context and the usage. And this can lead to significant differences in how these terms are interpreted. And this is this is an issue in areas where the precision is critical, such as in clinical or medical settings. But I think this probably can be critically important in other domains as well. So being able to precisely classify synonyms as either exact, related, broad, or narrow is very important for clarifying the specific meanings and applications and ensuring the proper communication and usage. So some examples of why we need to be sure that we're scoping the synonyms correctly are described here below. So again, in the clinical domain, this is very important for correct diagnoses and treatment decisions. Misinterpretations can cause confusion, lead to incorrect treatment plans, and could potentially be harmful to the patients being treated. It's also important for effective communication within the healthcare realm. There's also very diverse teams that include clinicians, researchers, nurses, patients, caregivers, etc. And clear distinction among the synonyms ensures that everyone involved at the different level of training has the correct understanding of the condition or the treatment discussed. And also in the area of medical documentation and coding. So I think across most healthcare systems, there's some kind of medical terminology that's used for the purposes of recording diagnoses and to billing insurance. So the medical coding that's done in doctors' offices, they rely heavily on this precise terminology. And it really requires an understanding of all the parties involved, and using the correct synonyms in the right context is really critical for accurate record keeping and insurance processing. And sometimes in our cases, as bioinformatics scientists, we may be leveraging some of the terminology that comes out of medical records for our analyses and research. So again, here's some examples from the clinical domain of some different synonyms. Again, we have myocardial infarction and heart attack. As we discussed earlier, these are not synonymous terms. If the primary term is myocardial infarction, or the heart attack, or the cardiac or the myocardial infarction is the medical term that describes the interaction of blood supply to the heart. And this is used for clinical diagnosis and documentation. And then heart attack is actually a broad or more general terminology. This is when the blood flow to the heart is blocked, and not to be confused with sudden cardiac arrest. This is when the heart malfunctions and stops beating. And it should be noted that a heart attack is a circulation problem, and a sudden cardiac arrest is actually an electrical problem. So they kind of have the same kind of outcome, but they actually are not caused by the same underlying cause. Other examples include osteoarthritis versus arthritis. So osteoarthritis is more of a narrow synonym. This refers to the type of arthritis when the flexible tissue at the end of the bone wears down. So this is more of a kind of a bone disorder, whereas arthritis is a more general term that includes osteoarthritis, and that refers to pain involving pain and inflammation in the joints. And it should be noted that there's about 100 different types of joint disease, making this more broader than the more specific type of arthritis osteoarthritis. Other commonly related synonym or terms that are not exactly synonymous are seizure and epilepsy.
Nicole, one second. I think we need to sample a little bit the aspects because we are running a little bit late for the main part of the tutorial. So just, I think for some of these examples that we list here, just a little bit more briefly so that we can get to everything.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so seizure and epilepsy, seizures are the medical event that occurs when someone has the disease epilepsy, or it could also occur without actually having a diagnosis of epilepsy. And tumor versus cancer. Tumor refers to the actual lump or growth, and cancer can be the actual diagnosis or the disease. We also distinguish here between cancer versus malignant tumor. This is an example from Mondo where we use cancer and malignant tumor as synonyms versus other medical terminologies may not actually use these in the same way, but we follow the National Cancer Institute thesaurus. So some important things to note is just that it's the importance of distinguishing between these exact broad and narrow synonyms. And this can really help with patient outcomes and precise medical care. So how are synonyms usually shared and curated? They're commonly shared in many different ways. Thesaurus is kind of the purpose of a thesaurus is to provide structured vocabulary of controlled terms that include the synonyms and the antonyms, the opposites for different terminology. There are synonym rings, which are groups of terms that are considered synonymous in a particular context without specifying the preferred term. So you kind of get the idea of several different terms that are used synonymously. As we know, we use ontologies to provide the formal set of representation of terms within a domain and also provide the synonymous terms in the ontology. And without going into too much more detail, taxonomies, controlled vocabulary, and lexical databases are also other sources of synonyms. So some of the importance of why we need to be concerned with how we're curating synonyms in our ontologies. One example is the database curation. We need to be able to identify the right ontology or vocabulary term during data curation. So having precise synonyms makes it easier to recognize if a specific class in ontology is the right term when you're curating the record in a database, especially if the more frequently used term is one of the synonyms. In this case too, I would advise if you're using ontologies for curation and you find that the primary label of the term is not the term that's most commonly used in your community, that you inform the ontology owners or make a pull request to the ontology to suggest that the label be revised. We get these requests in Mondo sometimes, and we like to align with what the community accepted preferred term is. Also integration of community level terminological preferences. So ontologies classes can have one preferred label. So this can create some difficulties in communities who use different terminologies for the same concepts. So with the uses of synonyms, we have the opportunity to give different communities different primary labels, and then another for the synonym. So we've done this in Mondo. We've had a couple of different communities who've come in and requested specific primary labels for specific terms, but then that it may be in conflict with other communities who use preferred labels. So for in Mondo, we've worked with the ClinGen community who do clinical gene variant curation, and they often prefer a specific approach to disease naming that conflicts with our preferred approach for disease naming in Mondo. So we've been able to add synonyms to Mondo and then give them a synonym property, which we'll talk about more, that is specific for their use cases. And then in theory, they could take the ontology and just filter out all the ClinGen preferred or the ClinGen labels and then use those as the primary labels in their curation interface. So that's kind of a specific use case where we've worked with a specific community to add preferred labels for their specific use cases. Also, one of my first projects I worked on, my first ontology project was the Eagle Eye Resource Ontology, which was an ontology of scientific resources that were used in research laboratories. And that was used to drive a curation interface. And we had a different application layer on top of our ontology, where we had preferred capitalization of terms and preferred labels that were used for the curation application. So there are ways to kind of give everybody there's different ways to kind of tailor the ontology to meet the needs of specific communities. Also, I think we've heard in some of these calls use cases using natural language processing, or text mining. Having synonyms is very critically important for this. If you want to match on specific terminology in the literature or elsewhere, having the synonyms added to the terms helps recognize concepts that are published in the literature or elsewhere. Also, for database search, synonyms are very important to return the relevant results that are stored in a database, particularly in fields like healthcare, legal, and academic databases where diverse terminologies are really common. So this helps users find the terms that they're looking for, even if they don't know the exact terminology. And also for automated ontology and knowledge graph matching, so especially like in Mondo or other ontologies, we align different terminologies or knowledge graphs or controlled vocabularies, and having synonyms available helps with this alignment and helps us determine if two different terms are equivalent. Okay, looks like we're on time. So the importance of explicitly curated synonyms may be a little less obvious in the age of LLMs, where synonyms are naturally represented in some magic place called latent space, which makes it possible for chatbots to understand if two expressions refer to the same real world concept. But as we know, the LLMs are still being developed and they're far from perfect at reflecting specialized scientific synonymy. And they're still prone to hallucinations as of the time of writing this tutorial. So in scenarios where accuracy and provenance are important, having these structured sources of synonyms is really key. And the work that we do to build our ontologies and provide proper synonyms is very important. Before I move on, does anyone have any questions or comments about what we've talked about so far? Okay, so next we're going to talk about the OBO model for synonyms. So we'll talk about the OBO modeling, and then we'll talk about the synonym properties and the synonym types. So, our standard metadata properties for the OBO Foundry are included in the OBO metadata ontology, which you can see here. I can't see. Okay, here we go. So here we can see this is the OBO metadata ontology, which specifies the terms that are used for annotation, used to annotate ontology terms in all OBO ontologies. This is developed as part of the IAO, the Information Artifact Ontology. I think most, if not all of us, use these as our primary source for our annotations in our ontologies. And there are two hierarchies of the synonym types of particular relevance for synonym representation. We have synonym properties and synonym types. So these links link out to the ONTB representation of the synonym hierarchy and OMO. We have the broad, exact, narrow, and related synonyms, and then we have this is an example of the synonym type properties that are in OMO, or a partial example here. So we have things like we've mentioned abbreviations, we have layperson synonyms, plural forms. Oh yeah, in addition to different languages, we also have some ontologies will add the UK spelling as a synonym to the ontologies. Something like this really helps with text mining and NLP. And yeah, and so we're going to refer to these two reference guides here, one on the overview of the synonym properties and one on the synonym types. So we'll get into a deeper dive on these specific topics right now. So the different synonym properties in OBO. So we'll talk about the kind of generally about the synonyms and the validation and the overview of the synonym types. So as we know, a synonym indicates an alternative name for a term, and terms can have multiple synonyms. As we mentioned, I think we all may know this, but terms can only have one primary label, but then they can have an indeterminate amount of different synonyms. So, and they can have different types of synonym types. So here's an example below for the Mondo term cancer, which has many exact synonyms and a related synonym. So we could have as many exact, related, narrow, and broad synonyms as needed for the term. So below here is a list of the widely used synonym properties. So we have an exact synonym where the definition of the synonym is exactly the same as the primary definition. This is used when the same class can have more than one name. A related synonym is an alternative label for a class that has been used synonymously with the primary term name, but the usage is not strictly correct. Broad synonyms is for a synonym that is more general than the preferred label, and a narrow synonym is more specific. And there's also the class alternative label. Some ontologies use this. This is used to refer to a class or property instead of the preferred label. They should be used to indicate community or context specific labels like abbreviations, shorthands, and forms like this. Also used as alternative label. This is not recommended by OBO, but I've seen this used in some ontologies. Hidden label. This is a label that's used for a resource when the resource should be hidden when generating displays on the resource, but it should be accessible to the free text search operations. In Mondo, we have something like this where it's we have deprecated properties and historic, and I'll go into more examples there. But this hidden label is available, but it's not recommended by OBO, as well as alternative name is another property that's available, but it's not recommended by OBO. And here we just have kind of a graphical description of what we just described above. If you're more of a visual learner, this is a nice figure to refer to. So, so the definition of a synonym is meant to be exactly the same as the primary definition. So this is for classes that have more than one name. So for example, hereditary Wilms tumor also has the term familial Wilms tumor. In Mondo, we use the terms hereditary and familial as interchangeable exact synonyms. We also have examples of translations into other languages that are used as exact synonyms. For example, the plant ontology lists both Spanish and Japanese translations as exact synonyms. And I cannot say these terms, but here is a Spanish translation and the Japanese translation of anther wall. So narrow synonyms are the narrow synonyms. The definition of a synonym is the same as the primary definition, but has additional qualifiers. So for example, a pod is a narrow synonym of fruit. And when you add narrow synonyms, you should consider first whether or not you should be actually adding a new subclass instead of the narrow synonym. And for any uncertainty, it's recommended to start a discussion on the GitHub tracker if you're unsure if a class should just be a narrow synonym or it should be actually a new term itself. And again, broad synonyms, the opposite of the narrow, is when a synonym is more general or encompasses other structures. So there's also the consideration whether the broad synonym should be added as a superclass of a term versus as just as a synonym. But an example is cyst of the eyelid has a broad synonym, lesion of the eyelid. And then related synonyms, I feel like are a little bit more tricky. Sometimes I question why we would add a related synonym if it's not exactly the same term. It's not meant to indicate the same concept, but related synonyms are often added in cases where the community or people are using these terms, whether or not the usage is not strictly correct. So users may not always be aware that the synonym usage is used incorrectly when searching for a term. So adding the related synonyms is useful, especially for things like search and retrieval or text mining or NLP. So example, autistic behavior often is referred to as autism spectrum disorder, and then these two things are not technically the same. And then it's really, really helpful to include provenance on the synonyms. In Mondo, I think we require that we have provenance on the synonym, or maybe we don't require, but we generally, we don't have it, our quality control checks don't fail if we don't include provenance, but we do encourage the addition of provenance. I want to say in Uberon maybe that it is required. So we've been in all of our OBO ontologies, we follow the Go family ontology development patterns using the database cross-reference property to represent the provenance in general on synonyms and on other annotations like definitions. So types of provenance that can be included on a synonym could be someone's ORCID, their kind of personalized ID number generated through orchid.org. And this is meant to be interpreted as this person asserted this synonym or verified this synonym. When I'm curating ontologies, if someone requests a synonym to be added, I will add their ORCID as this is the person that requested the synonym. And then also, or you could add an ontology term saying, which means that the synonym was the source from this ontology concept. So in Mondo, we may, we integrate various disease terminologies into one single ontology, and we will add the synonyms, like say we have a term that came from the disease ontology, we would give the disease ontology the cross-reference, or if it came from NCIT or elsewhere, or we'll add a PubMed ID if the specific paper mentions this term as a synonym. So, and we use a format where we have the PubMed ID : no space, and then the number. So you can see that in these examples below. So some other ontologies have started using the DC contributor or RDFS also for provenance, but this is not widely adopted. So if you have any questions about how to capture the provenance in under synonyms in your ontology, we recommend that you just kind of start a conversation on your tracker or maybe in the OBO Slack channels to get recommendations from the community. And it's recommended to be generous with the provenance when curating synonyms. It's super helpful when you go back to the term later to understand why specific terms are added, especially if they seem kind of questionable or you're uncertain why this was added. And capturing the ORCID from the curator that captured the synonym, or you could link to the research organization registry or ROR identifier for the organization that promotes them, or using the PubMed ID or a DOI to a specific paper is super helpful when you go back and look at the synonyms to understand why the specific synonyms were added. I see there's a lot of chat. Are there any questions that are coming up that we should discuss now, or should I keep going?
And Sue just made a good comment about related synonyms. So Sue, do you want to just quickly share this?
Yeah, so I can share that. And then I do have a question that is a thorny question that I keep thinking about. So just when you were asking why put related synonyms in, so the MP does that routinely for, because we don't have like terms for specific tumors. We have terms for increased or decreased incidence of those tumors, but people often just want to look for the tumor name. So we'll put those in as related because they aren't really the same concept, but it's helpful for searching.
That's a great
example. And then the other question I have that I constantly think about and is coming up is, you have this problem of exact is supposed to be exact and broad is supposed to be a broader concept. But what do you do when two different terms have the same exact synonym? So an exact synonym has two different meanings, both of which exactly match a term. So it's not really broader. And it most typically comes up with things like with acronyms or anything that involves an acronym. So we have like abnormal PPI as an exact synonym to two different terms because PPI is an acronym for pre-pulse inhibition, and it's also an acronym for paired pulse inhibition. Or one of the funny ones that came up as we've been doing some of the matching is just the acronym ASD, because it stands for autism spectrum disorder, but it also stands for atrial septal defect.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
We
it
actually
has
have,
two exact meanings.
yeah, we have examples coming up. Those
Okay.
maybe even the exact same examples. Yeah. No, I mean, that's a thing that happens, that you can have the same synonym that has two meanings, like you said, and I think and I know in Mondo, and I think in most ontologies, that just has to be an allowable thing. And
Yeah, it just throws warnings on the dashboard and it annoys me.
oh yeah. Yeah. Well, Sabrina's here, and she always says, when curating using ontology, you have to read the definition. You can't just look at the labels or the synonyms. You have to make sure that the ASD that you retrieved is actually the ASD that you're referring to, not just going off the synonym or the label. So it's the importance of it, actually reading the definition and looking at the hierarchy and making sure this is actually the term the concept that you're looking for. Great. Any other questions before we move on? Or anything else coming from the chat that we should discuss?
I had a question, but I think it's sufficiently similar to Susan's that we can skip it.
About the similar.
Yeah, it's just kind of, yeah, like, yeah, I agree. Yeah, it just comes down to, okay, you do actually need to read the definition.
Yeah. Yeah. That's Sabrina's soapbox. Okay. Moving on. Okay, so yeah, talking about synonym types, and this exact example is going to come up. So yeah, so we have the synonym properties that encode the specific synonym type as exact or broad. The synonym types encode the purpose of the synonym. So the synonym type represents the function of a specific synonym, such as acronyms, layperson, or language translation. And the synonym properties must be included in OMO to recognize a valid synonym. So, and I think in every ontology, you would have to specify if it's exact, broad, or narrow, or related. There's no possibility just to say it's a synonym. It has to have a specific synonym type, or synonym scope. The types are defined by the ontologies themselves. So, so this can be confusing for tool developers. So, for example, at the time of this writing, there's a number of ontologies that define their own properties for layperson and plural form. So OMO does specify these as specific OMO terms, but you can also create your own synonym types in your ontology, which can cause some confusion between ontologies. So below are some typical synonym types that are used in a lot of different ontologies. We've already mentioned abbreviations. So, and then it's noted here that the scope for the acronym should be determined on a case-by-case basis. So abbreviations used for actual abbreviations or for acronyms, that's kind of used interchangeably. So things like ASD for atrial septal defect, or autism spectrum disorder. But they should be used carefully, because not necessarily all acronyms are exact. There's a synonym type of ambiguous to indicate the synonym is open to more than one interpretation or may have double meaning. So I guess I haven't seen this done, but I guess someone could, if you had ASD as a synonym, you could clarify that this is ambiguous, since you know that it could be used for two different meanings. Dubious synonym to indicate a synonym may be suspect. We use this in Mondo since we're bringing in terminologies we're aggregating or integrating different terminologies. So this comes up every once in a while. Layperson term to indicate the term is common language. This is used by HPO. I'm not aware of it being used elsewhere. I think the SCDO, the sickle cell disease ontology, is considering adding these. Plural form to indicate the term has more than one. I think this is particularly relevant for text finding purposes. UK spelling, so the English is written in either American English or British English. Other possible synotypes are under discussion that are considered harmful. so these are examples like terminology that's no longer kind of accepted to be politically correct. And different classes, a very different class of synonym types are language translations. So synonyms and language translations may not be considered synonyms at all. But it makes sense to separate the two because the way they're represented in the ontology are very different from normal synonyms. And this is discussed more below. So yeah, you can see more additional synonym types in the OMO page if you look on Bioportal or elsewhere. So below describes some more common synonym types, which we just went through with some examples here. It's like abbreviation, maybe et cetera for et cetera. Acronyms like ventricular fibrillation syndrome is abbreviated as VF. Here's an example of a dubious synonym from Mondo, where Morvan disease is a synonym for neuropathy, hereditary sensory autonomic type 2A. In the HPO, we have the layperson synonym for hemangioma as strawberry mark. The plural form is very straightforward, just the plural atonic seizures for atonic seizure. The UK spelling, where the spelling of leukemia differs a little bit in the UK spelling versus in the American English. And so here's an example of a ambiguous synonym, and I linked to the GitHub ticket here, just if you wanted to hear more of the discussion, where astrocytoma was a synonym for astrocytoma excluding glioblastoma. So this is kind of unclear. So, and I also included some additional synonym types from Mondo here, since we have some additional ones that aren't present in other ontologies. We have these deprecated and excluded synonyms. Deprecated synonym is historic and discouraged. For example, Angelman syndrome has historically had this synonym called happy puppet syndrome. For obvious reasons, that doesn't seem very appropriate anymore. So this has been deprecated, or we exclude some synonyms. Like I said, in Mondo, we're integrating other ontologies. And for example, I think from NCIT, we sometimes get these synonyms that are probably pretty commonly used in medical practice, but they're very ambiguous for an ontology, where we have this type of astrocytoma where the NOS is not otherwise specified. So in an ontological sense, that doesn't really give us doesn't have a lot of meaning. So we just exclude these synonyms. And then, as I mentioned, we also add with this one specific use case with a community we work with who uses our ontology, we add specific labels for their community because they prefer a specific type of disease naming nomenclature where they add the gene name to the disease. So they have PXDN related ocular dysgenesis. And this differs from the naming conventions that are used by OMIM, the Online Mendelian Inheritance of Man, where they name the kind of the phenotype and then create a numbered series that corresponds to the genes. So, and this is just an example of how these are displayed in Protégé. So they'd be under the synonym type property hierarchy. And then this is an example of some of the properties that we use in Mondo and how they're displayed in Protégé. So, so in OWL, you can see, if you click here, these little expansions here, you can see how the ClinGen label looks in the OWL format. So you can see that here. And then you can see in the OBO format, it's a little easier to read. These are how these are displayed here. And then I just included this, just FYI, how to add the synonym types in Protégé in this current version that I think we're all using now. You kind of have to do this autofill here. So if you click on adding the annotations, and then you just go to the entity IRI and start typing in the type of synonym you want, and then it'll autofill, then you can add it to your term. So lastly, the last thing we have put together for you to talk about is the overview of validation. So some basic considerations for validation. There's a lot of checks that have been built in for to automatically check for the correct usage of synonyms. A lot of these come from robot. So some of the basic validations that I think are used across all OBO ontologies to check for the proper usage. So some examples are shared here, some basic validation. One being checking for duplicate synonyms. The same synonym cannot be an exact synonym on two distinct concepts. So this is a duplicate exact synonym check implemented in the robot report. So if the synonym is exact, the assumption is that no two terms can have the same synonym. But then there are cases, just like you said, Sue, with the ASD, where the synonyms are not globally unique. So so the abbreviation ASD for atrial septal defect and autism spectrum disorder. So so yeah, so like Sue was saying that she'll get warnings on her OBO dashboard for this. So and then other examples, terms like depression could refer to like the mental health concern, or it could be like depression, like in a geological sense of depression in the ground. So yeah, this definitely can cause some ambiguity and confusion amongst users. So there's this test for the duplicate scope synonyms. So, but then there's cases where it cannot always easily recognize the quasi-scoped duplicate synonyms. So there's an example below here where you see three synonyms that almost seem like they're the same, but they have different scopes. So it's noted here that we need better tools to recognize these cases. So, and the same synonym cannot be an exact synonym and a label at the same time. So this is implemented as a duplicate label synonym check in the robot report. There's been some controversy and confusion about this. We cannot express this assumption to hold in all cases for various reasons. One, for historical reasons, some ontologies avoid attaching synonym metadata and provenance to the primary label of the class. Oh, Sue, I see you have a question.
Yeah, but I want to go back a little bit, so which is why I was raising my hand to not interrupt.
Oh, sure.
You had the example for the walkthrough of how to add the synonym type. And you had put it in as an RDS comment, but is that the way it should be done, or should it be done as has synonym type?
No, it should not be a comment. That's probably a mistake.
Okay.
Oh, here?
I just want I was like, yeah.
Oh, yes.
That was the thing I most wanted to get out of this, was how do I supposed to add these?
Yes. Oh.
So I was like, ooh, Nicole gave me directions, and I'm like, oops, wait, maybe that's not the right direction.
Yeah, this should be.
Thank you.
Yeah. I will fix this. Thank you. Yeah, that is an easy mistake to make, since that's the default.
Yes, I do it frequently and have to fix it.
Yeah. That probably would have been caught if I actually had committed that and gone through one of these checks. But I was just doing it as an example. Thank you so much. I will fix that. Okay. Yeah. So some of the checks. So we have duplicate label synonym. Yeah. So in Mondo, for example, we often actually do have the exact synonyms that are duplicated with the label, because we capture the preferred labels of many different terminologies and try to choose one primary label, but then we'll often add synonyms as exact synonyms as well. Nico, do you have a question? I see you turn on your camera.
Just we are entering the final minute of this presentation, so just so that you keep this in mind. Yeah.
And then another synonym types must be a child of the synonym type property. So if it's not declared as a synonym type property, this will throw up an error. And then we added some examples here for some examples from Mondo. So for example, we have a specific, we created a custom sparkle check that kind of extends the upon the robot checks, but we can exclude the exact synonym check that includes the abbreviations. So actually, Sue, this might be relevant to you. If you wanted to add this to MP, then you wouldn't have so many warnings, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, I only have a handful, but yeah, I definitely, that is my plan, is to add the abbreviations. So one question before I have to run.
Mhm.
I'm assuming you can add multiple types to the same synonym. So a synonym could
Oh.
both be an abbreviation and ambiguous.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Okay.
I've done that quite a lot.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Nicole. Excellent job.
Oh,
I
thank
got to go to another meeting.
Yes, it looks like we're at the top of the hour. We just have another couple examples or one more example here, but yeah, so we can have these different kinds of checks to check for different issues that might come up. And sometimes I'm really impressed at things like, how would anyone accidentally add a duplicate synonym to the same term? And then I actually literally just did it yesterday. So it's easy to make these mistakes, and it's really nice to have these QC checks to ensure that we're doing everything correctly. So this doesn't leave any time for questions, but thank you all so much for joining, and the materials are here. And of course, we're on Slack and available by email and all the ways. So please get in touch with any more questions, and we'd love to continue these discussions and help improve our terminologies and our ontologies.
Thank you very much, Nicole, and
Thank you.
for this presentation. Thank you everyone for joining. See you later.
Thanks, Nicole.